Hello again, and as I said, welcome to the Digital Workforce Executive Roundtable that we're running today. And glad you could join us on your lunchtime if you're in Sydney, or in Adelaide just before lunch, or in Brisbane well and truly before lunch, I hope. Before we start today, I do need to let you know that we will be recording the session, and it's in the chat window as well. The intent is to create a reusable asset that you'll be able to use in future, and plus also be able to provide to people who are who may not have been able to make today as well. To ensure privacy, and just to make sure everyone's pretty clear on that, we will be removing any personal identifiable information from the edited version of the final recording, and do ask that you do turn your camera off and please mute yourself as well. I would ask that you post your questions or comments into the chat window as we progress through the discussion, so just to keep the momentum and it free flowing as well. We've already got the recording started, and Lauren's already posted in the chat as well. So before we do actually start, and in the spirit of reconciliation on behalf of our audience, Microsoft, TeamGauge and Smart WFM, I'd like to acknowledge the traditional custodians of country throughout Australia and their connections to land, sea and community. We pay our respect to their elders past and present, and extend that respect to all Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander peoples today. My name is Gavin Brown, and I'm a Senior Industry Advisor at Microsoft. I'm coming to you today from Sydney. I joined Microsoft back in early 2020 after some 15 years as a senior executive in the New South Wales Public Service. As an industry advisor at Microsoft, I have the privilege of working with public service agencies across Australia in both the federal and state jurisdictions. And over the last year and a half, I've witnessed the most ambitious digital transformation of Australia's public and private workforce in the shortest period of time ever. Microsoft's CEO, Satya Nadella, states this as 2 years of digital transformation occurring in less than 2 months. So it's a pretty aggressive thing that happened. And if we hadn't all been subjected to the pandemic and lockdown orders, then really would this digital transformation have occurred at all? And it certainly would have happened in that 2-month time frame. And it's probably not, right? Have a look at what's happened in the past in your organisation. So as we are now entering in New South Wales, we've come past Freedom Day yesterday, and Victoria coming out of the longest lockdown globally. So what does the future of work look like as we move into higher vaccination rates and lockdowns are reduced and removed altogether, and we enter into this COVID normal? What does that look like? Will we snap back to everyone being in the office, or has the digital revolution shifted the needle sufficiently to make a truly digital workforce a reality? What will organisations need to change in order to support a true work from anywhere digital workforce? To answer these and many more questions, we're today joined by a number of experts in their field. So please join me in welcoming Carly Scott Murphy, a global specialist in employee experience at Microsoft. Carly.
Hey, thanks, Gavin, and hi everybody. I'm coming to you from the lockdown capital of the world, Melbourne, Australia. I'm of Australian descent, in my 40s, with shoulder-length brown hair, wearing a red top, my trademark red lipstick, and also my green-rimmed glasses. I go by the pronouns of she and her. I'm looking forward to our chat today and sharing my experiences as one of the global product specialists in the area of employee experience. Thanks for having me here today.
Awesome, thanks, Carly. And we also have Jared McGrath, founder and CEO of Smart WFM and the author of The Digital Workforce. Jared.
Thanks for the introduction, Gavin, and nice to be here today. I've been involved in people-related business transformation for most of my working life, and I'm incredibly passionate about people and maximising their value both inside and outside the workplace. I've been blessed to write The Digital Workforce, and it's written through the eyes of a customer and the journey that a customer needs to go on to achieve digital transformation success. Thanks again for having me.
Excellent. And finally, Richard Wardley, Enterprise Lead at TeamGauge. Richard.
Thanks, Gavin. Yeah, this is really exciting, this conversation. So coming to you from sunny Adelaide, and just as background, so TeamGauge, our obsession is all about, how we help teams work better. And I think there's nothing more topical than that right now for a lot of us. We've got a massive opportunity ahead of us in rethinking how we work in a better way as organisations and teams. So really looking forward to this conversation. Thanks, Gavin.
Awesome. Thanks very much, Richard. And look, this is a roundtable, right? At the end of the day, it is the idea is to make the conversation as free flowing as we can and open to questions. But as I said right at the beginning, we are recording this, and for privacy concerns as well, we'd really like you to please post your questions in the chat. And if you do have a comment, and there'll be some really interesting topics we're going to cover today. If you place them in the chat, what we'll do is we'll make sure I'll try and work them into the actual conversation as well. Or one of our hosts will actually answer the question as we roll through. We do have a number of people from Microsoft on the call as well who should be able to answer some of those questions as we move along. So let's crack into it and let's get going. So Carly, first across to yourself. I see there has been an update to the Microsoft Work Trends Index. Perhaps you could talk about what is the Work Trends Index, and as a first off anyway, and what are some of the key themes that we're seeing across from a Microsoft perspective across the globe in this digital workforce management environment?
Yeah, no problem. Great to kick it off. So yeah, the Work Trends Index report is something that Microsoft are creating and releasing every year around March. And for obvious reasons, the current kind of theme of the Work Trends Index report is hybrid work. I'll pop a link to it in a moment into the chat so people can go off and explore in more detail. But I think, one of the things that I think is quite shocking in terms of stats since we started the pandemic is that meeting time has doubled since February 2020, right? So, I mean, that's insane. But I mean, I'm sitting here thinking, yep, no problem. That's definitely I would agree with that. My calendar is very much back to back. And actually, one of the things that one of my customers said is we're kind of institutionalized in this kind of meeting space, particularly here in Melbourne, where I think I've been into the office maybe 3 times since February last year. The other thing that I have also noticed personally as well, I think I get to my emails at the end of the day, my volumes of emails, well, not my volume of email, gosh, the report talks about how the volume of emails has increased by 40 billion. If we look for February last year to February this year, right, that's billion with a B, right? So I think, it goes to show that work has definitely changed. Because of that pandemic. I think one of the key things that the report and the more recent kind of pulse to that report as well talks about is this hybrid paradox, right? And I think this is something that's really critical for organizations to think about today, right? People want the flexibility to work from home, but they also want to work in the office, right? They want best of both worlds. They want true flexibility, right? Not just lip service to the whole, well, you can come in 3 days a week and work from home twice, because that was kind of almost the more progressive way of old school thinking about sort of flexible work. Now we're starting to think about, flexibility in where I'm working from, right? So I could find talent in different places around the country or around the world because we might not necessarily need to have the talent right here in Melbourne where I might be. So I think the main thing to say is, yes, flexibility is here to stay. There is no going back to that old normal. But I must kind of point out that places like Perth, right, are still kind of in, grappling with that because they haven't had that really true experience in some areas. Whereas places like Melbourne, where we've been really hit by the lockdown experience, the thinking is very different. And so that's something we need to kind of think about if we're looking at a more regional experience is how that impact has happened. I think we need to look at things like balancing productivity so people don't burn out. One of the key points of that report is that high productivity is masking burnout. So we need to be super aware of the behaviours of our organisation as a whole and the sentiment of employees, right? Looking at both of those data points to understand what's happening. And I think the other thing I wanted to just to kind of touch on is a conversation that Satya Nadella, our CEO of Microsoft, and Ryan Roslansky, the CEO of LinkedIn, had recently, talking about the great reshuffle. And I think this is really super important to start thinking about as we do go back to kind of the new normal, is we're going to start to see people leaving organizations, right, as we kind of open up. So it's really important to start to consider our talent in organizations, right? Put people at the center of what we're doing and what we're thinking about their well-being. developing leaders to really help support all this, right? And the other thing I just mentioned in closing, right, the report also talks about leaders who are out of touch and really need this wake up call. So I think just creating a leadership that uses data, that really focuses on the employee from that grassroots level is important.
Yeah, I'm staggered. 40 billion additional emails. Is that what we're seeing from the increase from February last year?
Yep.
I'm sure that most of them in my inbox at the moment.
I'll fight you for those as well.
It's crazy. And the other one, you talked about the Great Reshuffle, and I've also heard it termed as the Great Resignation.
Correct.
As well, right? So that's a seriously, impactful and interesting when we've talked about borders in Australia being closed as well. So in the chat, there's certainly a question, and if you've got questions on the way through and comments, I'd love to hear from the actual audience as well about what sort of trends you're seeing in your workplace, and how do the trends and comments as we go through this session as well with Jared and Richard and Carly, how they relate to what you're seeing as well in your workplace. That would be really good. So across to you, Jared. Now, this is release 2 of your digital workforce book, and I understand you updated it just in time for COVID, so timing was perfect, or during COVID, I should say. You've just heard from Carly on the Work Trends Index. How do these trends relate to the research and your findings when you went and actually produced your book?
Yeah, thanks, Gavin. So there's many trends that are exactly the same as what I experienced when I went and actually wrote the second edition of the Digital Workforce. So I took the book very much through the eyes of a customer on a digital transformation journey when I wrote it, and to sort of make sure that theme or that experience flowed through, I did a number of interviews with customers, with vendors, so that I could actually validate a lot of my thinking and a lot of my anecdotal findings with actual real life experiences, because I felt that was really important. And what really came to the top for me in all of my research and a lot of the consulting work that we do with customers at the moment is that people experience is absolutely sitting there at the top. And if you talk about the Great Resignation or attraction of talent or retention of talent and good people just want to have a really good experience with you, and that experience mightn't necessarily just be a technology experience. It's actually thinking about what that experience means right from the culture of the organisation, the foundational sort of fabric of an organisation, and how that person interacts within that organisation. And I'm also seeing that to be an employer of choice these days, personalisation is really important. So I think a long time ago, or maybe it was only a short time ago, depending on which way you want to look at it, organisations were quite hierarchical in the way that they worked. And it was like, we're your employer and we pay you money and you will do what we tell you to do. But that thinking is gone by the wayside now, and it's all about the person and why would the person come and work at an organisation, and what can the organisation do for that person to actually grow their talent and help them be themselves and be their best person. And as well as that, I'm also seeing a lot of evidence that we need to consider very much from the coalface of an organisation and what the people at the coalface are trying to achieve and what they want from their careers right through to senior leadership. And it's really important that those goals of the organisation are understood by everyone in the organisation, from the coalface right through to senior leadership, and ultimately that those people at the coalface can actually unpack their passions, their desires, what they want to achieve from their career, and it's done in such a way that you're actually achieving the goals of the organisation as well. So there's sort of some of the key sort of trends and findings that I'm finding at the moment. And another interesting thing that I saw just on the weekend, and it's related to Microsoft, was, you know, there was an acquisition of Ally.io, which is going to become part of the Viva platform, and that's all about OKR, you know, objectives, goals, and key results, and I think that's part of that whole making sure that goals are understood and organisational objectives are understood, and we can actually get the best out of the people within the organisation. So interesting state of play at the moment, and a very exciting one.
That was a great announcement on Friday. Really excited about that one.
Excellent. I was going to ask you about that, but that's cool. And any insights, Carly? You're a global belt in this space. Is there anything that's coming out of there that you can go, hey, I know you just posted in the chat as well on it?
Yeah, no, I just posted the announcement, but yeah, look, it's really exciting. I think, you know what, Jared, definitely agree with what Jared's saying, right? For to kind of have a purpose across the organisation, connecting these goals. I think this is a great way of doing that and being connected across the organisation, and knowing, you know, how you can affect goals, or how you can affect the organisation. Again, it's about bringing the employee into the centre of things, right? And bringing that together and that experience. So yeah, it's going to be super exciting to have that journey as we bring Ally into the fold. Awesome.
And Richard at TeamGauge, so you're in the middle of this as well, right? That's your product set, and that's what your organisation does. So what are the similarities or differences that you're seeing from what Carly and Jared have talked about?
Yeah, that's a great question. I think, you know, Carly, we can all relate to the meetings fatigue and the emails. I think it just speaks to, you know, a lot of the inefficiency in how we're working at the moment. You know, we can work flexibly, but is flexible working? You know, most people say they're still only probably at a 4 out of 10 in terms of how well they are suited or optimizing how they work. And what we're seeing with our customers is similar to what the Productivity Commission research said last month, is that there isn't a one-size-all solution as organizations that we can rely upon. Of course, we need the policies and frameworks, you know, the shell of the house in place. But beyond that now, we've got to help teams and areas of our business who are very different, you know, finance, customer facing, non-customer facing, you know, remote workers versus centralized workers. They all have different needs and challenges. And so it's about how do we use our technology and our skills to adapt how we work, improve, and say, this is working, this isn't working. What do we do this week? Or what do we do next month? Not as a business, but as individual teams and business units. And the organizations, you know, that we work with are very focused around that. It's about enabling better decisions and some data to say, oh, we can see clearly that we've got too many meetings this month, or we've got too much time spent on Y, or we're not spending time with customers, so they can make informed decisions and really improve bit by bit, area by area, what they're doing. So that top-down approach that a lot of us have taken as organizations to improving and digital transformation is fine, but it's very slow. It's not agile as such. So the real quest, I think, for our customers is how do we create better decisions, better agility, better actions and improvement around work ongoing at the team level.
I think that data informed decisions is what I'm hearing, right? I think Richard from both our sides is right. Data informed decisions is going to be is the way to go, right?
Absolutely, yeah.
Awesome. And let's shift gears a little bit now and focus on a couple of the trends that came out of, I think, the index report and also from Jared's book, and explore them a little bit further in this new digital workforce. So this is an interesting one. So people are at the epicenter of everything we do. And it's a really interesting point, right? It seems super, super, super obvious, but really, is it obvious? Do we really understand what this means from a hybrid or a digital working environment? And how would you see employee experience? We talked about that a little bit before. How do we see that employee experience as being key to that? Carly, first off, your thoughts on that?
Yeah, I think this is something that Microsoft has, even before the pandemic, had been thinking about. I mean, we did launch the employee experience area or pillar of technology back in February last year, and so we were obviously thinking about it way before that. So you know, and that is one of the reasons, right? That is the key premise of Microsoft Viva, is really to create a focus on the experience of the employee. So I think, you know, my background is in HR and recruitment, and in that community there is a lot of talk about this increasing turnover, as I mentioned before, and I've posted in the chat in terms of a link to kind of that the discussion of the great reshuffle between Satya and Ryan. But you know, if the increased turnover, right, happening in organisations, and a lot of that is to do where the employee is not being put at the centre, right? So there's a lot of power now between candidates and employees, right, to create a better experience. You know, as I mentioned before, if there isn't flexibility on offer and true flexibility, then people will find a place that does. Or if I'm burnt out and my manager isn't helping me with my workload, well, then I'll move roles or I'll move organisations, right? So we have customers who are using, and Microsoft are using, things like Viva Insights, right, to better understand the actual behaviours of their workforce in an aggregate view. We're not looking at particular individuals. We're looking at kind of trends in the organisation and in roles or in areas, right, to identify those red flags that might contribute to that great reshuffle, right? So too many meetings back to back, too much after hours work, not enough time to think on strategic work, not enough one-on-one time with managers, etc. And if an organisation can understand kind of that behaviours and combine it with some of those sentiments that come from things like TeamGauge, right, we can start to create that data-informed decision and drive a better employee experience. If we think about things from a learning perspective, right, data also shows us that employees who are given the opportunity to learn and grow are more engaged and more happier with the organisation. So if we can provide them with that experience to drive this engagement, then why wouldn't we grab it with both hands? So I think that's where Viva Learning starts to bring together these experiences and try to encourage learning in the flow of work. So I think, you know, these are just a couple of the examples, but where the employee experience is really the centre of that engagement, right? People are the lifeblood to business, and we need to make sure we focus on that.
Yeah, really interesting. And it's, you know, if you look back, and I think we had this conversation prior to setting up this meeting, we talked about, you know, it used to be about money, right? It used to be a lot about money. And what I'm hearing now from what you're saying is actually that's sounding secondary is a little bit. I mean,
yeah, well, I think it still obviously forms a component to it, but you know, there are a lot of things that people think about, right? How collaborations happen, the culture of companies as well, right? I here at Microsoft, and I you know, all over my LinkedIn kind of posts, I talk about how I finally found an employer that I'm happy to say I want to work for Microsoft for the rest of my life. I found this connection between values and purpose, and I have the ability to do things like my mental health, normalizing the mental health conversation and promoting that, and leading the mental health teams here. And so that's, you know, I've got this purpose and driven, you know, so this is all a part of what an employee, an employee will look for, but also a candidate will be looking for, right? The values, the culture of the organisation, as well as the money.
Awesome, thank you. And Jared, so in all of your interviews that you've done for your book, why do we have to be so obvious to put what seems like a completely obvious point first?
So I think it comes back to what we've been talking about already, and that is the person at the centre. And if you want to retain them, attract them, and keep them, they have to remain at the centre. So if I was to take a blank sheet of paper, my drawing, and I'm not a very good drawer, would be a very simple drawing. I'd put a person on it, and then I'd just put a circle around them. And that's where everything in the organisation really has to emanate from. But as the conversation's sort of been unfolding, I was thinking, when I wrote the first edition of the book, I put a chapter in there which was all about measurement. So how do we measure value within an organisation? And in the first edition of the book, when I wrote it, measurement was very traditional thinking when it came to measurement. So I've got an organisational goal, and how do I cascade that organisational goal to people? So, and the organisational goal was generally money centric. So how do I reduce labour costs by 3%? Or how do I increase productivity by 5%? But it was very financially centric goals. And you know, to Carly's point, finance is still important, but I totally rewrote the measure chapter when I did the second version of the book, and it was to take a lot of these things that we're talking about now into consideration. So when I wrote the measure chapter in this version of the book, what I basically said was the person sits at the center, and then sitting around the person is technology, is the environment then that person works in. And so you have to start thinking about the person, the technology, and the environment, and how they all interact together to start to maximize the value of that person, because it's not all one way. Like if we put technology in place, it should be seen as a collaborator to that person to actually help drive better value or better decision making from that person. And then again, how does that contribute to the organizational goals? Taking that one step further, then you have to actually then think about, well, what's the organisation trying to achieve? So if I go from an organisational point of view, from a senior leadership point of view, or a stakeholder point of view, or a shareholder point of view, what are the influences that are important to those stakeholders then to drive the behaviour of the people in the organisation? So is my organisation purely money focused? And if you are, that's fine, no problem at all. But do we want to consider whole of system thinking? So do we want to start looking at our processes across our whole organisation to drive greater value through those people? And that was one of the biggest changes again I saw with the market and the research when I did the second edition of the book. And it's really starting to think differently about how we drive and measure value, and again from the coalface right through to senior leadership, stakeholders and shareholders.
Awesome. And Richard, what's your thoughts on this topic?
Yeah, I completely agree, Jared, about, you know, really thinking about the people, but what are we trying to achieve here together? And I think we all, you know, nod when we say people are at the center, but turning that good intent into real impact and outcomes is challenging because everyone is different. And I think the thing that we've learned is putting ourselves in people's shoes when we are designing these solutions and systems. So if I give you an example, we work with an allied health team, and the intent very much was around how do we help our patients? Well, how do we help them have greater experience with us? And then when we ask the teams, okay, well, so what do you need to be aware of? What do you need to be discussing regularly? The areas and the measures that they came up with were very different to what management had anticipated. So there were things around workload management. There were things around energy in the team, things around communication and patient impact. And the interesting thing was about that is it surfaced some really immediate kind of issues and challenges that the team could work on together. And I think the other part of that, people at the center, is we need to kind of empower people being at the center to solve some of these problems as well. We can't just put this algorithm in, it's going to solve everything. We also need to think about the most complex challenges that actually need to be solved by people. So in this medical example, the team actually got together. They talked about why there was a real dip in patient impact. They talked about some new equipment that had been put in. It was actually slowing the process down rather than helping the process. And they resolved it with management really, really fast. But if we hadn't asked the group about what they need to be measuring and talking about, if we hadn't empowered those people to actually escalate and talk about those challenges, you know, we could still be having that challenge, or they could still be having that challenge, you know, 12, 18 months on. So I think that's a nice example from our perspective of putting ourselves in, you know, our people's, our team's shoes in many ways.
And actually, I wanted to add an anecdote from our side at Microsoft, and I think the engagement and the what Richard's talking about is super important. I think on top of that, like one of the things that we found in our senior leadership team here at Microsoft, one of the stories is about that anecdotal evidence, but the for one-on-one meeting time, right? There was a discussion about our manager model coach care kind of ethos that we have, and the senior leadership team were all like, oh, no, we do that. The evidence, the anecdotal evidence and stories tells us that we're doing what we're doing. But when our area transformation lead actually put up the data in terms of the actual behaviours of what people were doing, as opposed to the anecdotal stories, we could see that they weren't doing it as much as they thought they were. So I think, going back to kind of that data-driven decision, if you have those stories and that evidence from surveys, etc., and asking people, but combine that with kind of the actual behaviours of what's happening, you can get this really powerful view of what is happening, and then give that information to that grassroots kind of managers to then say, hey, you can make a difference in terms of how your employees are feeling or behaving or experiencing things, right? So I think the stories that Richard is sharing is super powerful, but going to that point of data is driving these decisions.
Awesome. Yeah, very, very interesting. So the other one now, we talked a little bit about it before, the well-being. So it's a term that's been bandied around for some time, and especially during the pandemic. How important is well-being of your staff and teams to your organisation's well-being and health? And so I'll start with you, Richard. What's your thoughts on this topic?
Well, I think we've seen some of the scary statistics. We know what a challenge this is for every one of us. The question is obviously what we do about it, and I think we all see good intentions drop off when we get busy. Are you okay day? And we have these moments where we're all around one another. And then, we get busy, back-to-back meetings, and it drops off. And I think for us and our customers, it's about how do we have a more systematic approach to supporting others and people around us in our organizations. So there's a couple of things that we've seen really make a difference. Looking at the obvious measures around health, energy levels, workload management, but understanding that not at an organizational level, that's important first and foremost. But having the granular detail of what does that look like for us as a smaller team of 4, 5, 6 people, say. So that's important. The other bit is there's a lot of research around the value of having regular check-ins. So as teams, physical or virtual teams, checking in with one another, but in a systematic way, not in a fuzzy way, because often they become very kind of ad hoc, fluffy conversations that don't always deliver value. But what a lot of our customers are doing is they're using feedback to kind of fuel these check-ins every week, every month, to say, hey, I can see that we've dipped in this area. What do we want to do about that? Or I can see all of us are having a challenge in terms of workload management right now. So there's one customer, another customer that had one question, and it said, what are the expectations around out of hours work in our team? I genuinely don't know. And everyone kind of stood back and said, whoa, yeah, I was thinking that. And it led to a really amazing 15-minute conversation that relieved a lot of stress and anxiety for people over a number of weeks to follow that conversation. And that was because they had a systematic check-in, a way of raising concerns and talking about those concerns. So I would say, be systematic about getting feedback and have a process of, at a local level of talking about that stuff. We can't solve everything, but we can certainly listen. And just by talking and listening, we can make a big difference.
Awesome. Yeah, it does. It makes a huge difference to actually have someone listen to you. And Jared, across to yourself, what are you saying, mate?
So from a well-being point of view, I think that the organisation has a much larger responsibility than perhaps it did previous to the pandemic. And we've got our people now inside and outside work in that same physical environment most of the time, i.e. they're in their homes. So the home has become the office, the gym, the movie cinema, the sleeping quarters, the restaurant. It's everything now. And so the organisation, I think, could be a little less responsible for the person outside of work as they perhaps were previously. But now the organisations, and especially a number of the senior leaders that I've spoken to within organisations, realise that their responsibility is to take responsibility of the person inside and outside of the workplace. But you think about a lot of what we've been talking about in this conversation. If you really want to put the person at the centre of everything you do, what a great way to do that. Because if you really want to understand the person and how to get the best out of that person, you need to actually think about that person inside and outside the workplace. So there's a lot of things here that are coming together in a very positive manner. And then I think the other thing that especially senior leadership need to be considering is that well-being actually needs to become part of the overall workforce strategy. So it's not just something anymore that sits to the side. It needs to be something that becomes integral to the way that it all works. And then you listen to Richard and his findings about being systematic and so on. So that all becomes then part of that workforce strategy as well. And so well-being is it's part of the fabric of an organisation now. And I think from an employee's point of view, and from a worker's point of view, or a team member's point of view, or a store associate, or whatever you want to call, the wonderful talent that makes up your organisation, I think it's wonderful for the talent within the organisation, and the organisations that get that and start moving in that direction. And there's a number of them that are starting to move that way now, or are already there. They're the ones that are really going to get the gold and accelerate quickly as an employer of choice into the future.
Yeah, Jared, it's not just about yoga mats and smoothies, right? Which is kind of the traditional view of well-being. And I think what I'm I mentioned before, I lead the what we call the Real Mates program here at Microsoft, which is kind of like mental first health aiders, right? The custodians of conversation and that kind of first conversation with our colleagues, right? So we're starting to take things here at Microsoft Australia and New Zealand is really starting to think about, how can we support the workforce in different ways, and not just, the EAP program that's traditionally there, but how do we even take a step back and start to think about that, right? And again, using things like data to understand kind of those red flags for things like burnout through over collaboration or through after hours work, right? And going back right full circle to the start of that hybrid, Work Trends Index is really, that point of high productivity masking this exhausted workforce that they're just kind of going, continuing on, and we'll start, potentially start to see people drop like flies. So it's really important to kind of use this data to be able to understand that and to start thinking more broadly about things like, mental health initiatives like we're doing here at Microsoft and the Corporate Mental Health Alliance that Stephen Worrell is a chair to for that as well. So well-being is a very big thing that we'll be looking at, and it's just not yoga mats and smoothies anymore.
Yeah, and look, it's interesting, having been in the public sector for many, many years, we do talk about, being able to compete on salary versus against the private sector. But interesting when you start talking about well-being, so it's not just the money anymore. So you've got the Great Resignation, the Great Shuffle, whatever you want to call it. You've got this competition that's actually happening around being the employer of choice, and before you'd be able to earn the top quartile of dollars, but actually that's not the number one factor now. If you've got well-being, employee at the centre, and you're really taking into consideration all of those factors for your employee, I mean, that's now got to be as important or even more important than the money, Carly. I mean, is that what you're saying as well, right?
Yeah, I think, referring back to my point before, just that holistic view, right? Money is definitely a contributor, but there will be people who will be looking out, particularly like Gen Z, as they come into the workforce. We're seeing more and more of these conversations around things like flexibility, around, purpose, around values and mission. And those things are really starting to mean more, because work it's no longer like 9 to 5, let's work and then I have a life. It's right, work and life are really integrated together, because of kind of that always on culture, right? With my phone sitting there at night watching TV, someone in the US will ping me and I'll respond, right? So we need to be able to have this thinking about how do we work more flexibly, how do we allow people to work how they want to work, right? So I start work on a later day and I work into the evening. We've got people who might be parents who want to kind of be there for drop off and pick up and kind of work around that. So there's that need for that flexibility. So there's lots of ways that we can start to think about the importance of the employee experience in a lot of different ways that just goes above that cash perspective.
Cool. Now, always a topical one, right? We've got a number of leaders on the call today as well. So let's have a look at leadership in this new paradigm. So what needs to happen in this space? What skills, tools, and technologies do I need as a leader to actually support this hybrid digital working environment and create the best employee experience and make sure I'm looking after the well-being of my team? So Carly, I'm going to shoot back to you first off on that one.
Yeah, and I acknowledge we've got leaders on the call and I know we're coming close to time, so I'll be super quick with my response here. I think, it's really just reiterating points I've made already, right? Using data to inform your decisions, right? There is a lot more data out there. You've got the engagement data, as we're talking from Richard, the new, it's been around for a while, but really coming to light, things like Viva Insights to be able to drive that, right? The importance of having that dedicated time with your directs and your directs having it with their indirects, right, to give people that ability to communicate and manage workloads. Being aware that, those you can make those grassroots change, right? If you give your managers data about their team's after hours work, right, then they will help make that change. It's not about a corporate wide program of, hey, we're going to look at after hours work. If we can be targeted with that change programs, our money and our resources in that space will be more effective. So really, I think that the biggest thing I would say is, yes, be aware of using that data, be aware of the importance of what we've been talking about the great reshuffle and bringing that balance and culture to the team.
Awesome. And then Richard, across to you, mate. From a tooling perspective, what are some of the best practices that you're seeing and are being required to support leaders in managing hybrid teams?
Yeah, Gavin, I think there's so much pressure on leaders, on their shoulders. And I think what we need to do is relieve some of that pressure. So from a systems perspective, what we're really focused on is, something that unites the leaders and the team members so they can come together and think about the solutions together. It's, the leader cannot be the bottleneck, cannot solve every problem in the world. I think we all acknowledge that. And as Carly said, the younger generations, they're really committed to the purpose of our organizations. They have ideas, they have things that they want to bring up. So the systems and the solutions, TeamGage and other systems, can actually harness that by getting teams and leaders together to think about, what can we do more? Rather than what does the leader need to do for me? What can we do better as a collective team? So the systems and solutions, I think, can really alleviate some of that pressure from leaders. And create more kind of innovation, adaptation, solutions thinking within teams that's just better for everyone in how they work together. And then the second point is what Carly said is, if we give some data and insights to leaders, help them understand what to do with that. So we created TeamGage Academy in the last few months purely because we saw a need for leaders to look at information and know what to do next, how to engage with their teams. So I would say those two things from us.
Okay, awesome. And finally, Jared, what are some of the soft skills required by managers and leaders to support their teams in this hybrid digital workforce environment?
So in the second edition of my book, I had a chapter that wrapped together all of the findings from the research and the interviews and the experiences just from, running a digital transformation business. And there was 10 key findings at the end, and one of them was leadership needs transforming too. And for me, I think that the most important thing that leadership can do to actually help with all of this is to actually understand what digital transformation really is. And I still think, from my experiences, there's a lot of leaders that don't know what digital transformation really means. And I see that there's a lot of leaders that think of digital transformation in a very siloed approach. So what have I got to do to fix my onboarding process, or my recruitment process, or my shift rostering process, or whatever it happens to be? But that's not digital transformation. That's just taking a point problem and solving it with some sort of point solution. True digital transformation cuts the organisation in a horizontal way and goes right to the core of the operating model of that business, and it reimagines that operating model almost with that blank sheet of paper again. And I still see far too few leaders, in my experiences, not looking at the business from a horizontal point of view and from an operating model point of view. And I feel that that's where the greatest value can be obtained within organisations, and a lot of that has to be driven from leadership and the way in which they consider and run and operate their businesses. And for me, that's the goal. And then if you want to put that person at the centre and get the most from that person, that's where it really comes from. And if you come back to that example that Richard talked about earlier with that allied health customer, what I would say to a customer like that is, what is the experience you want for your residents? What is the experience that you want from your carers? What is the experience that you want from your residents' families within those health environments? And that's just a totally different way of thinking about the operating model of the future. And that's the way leadership needs to think as well, to really get the gold from that organisation, and ultimately to build an organisation that is economically and commercially viable into the future.
Yeah, interesting. Yeah, fascinating. And it's interesting around, digital transformation versus digitisation. So I think you picked on a couple of topics, which is really the digitisation piece, and you really need to be thinking outside and holistically in the horizontal path as well. So look, we're getting towards the end. I know people are probably hungry to eat, or they've been eating in the background. But I hope that the audience has actually got some good insights from what we've been talking about today, and how to manage and work and lead and understand what the employee is thinking about in this new way of working, because it's not really going to go away. You can see there's a lot of discussion around on it, and it really has changed. Our environment has changed, probably for the better as well in some aspects. But before we close, I'd like to ask for a final takeaway from each of our panelists, and Carly, your closing comments and some key points.
Yeah, look, I think, I'm bringing it up and up again, but I think, my final kind of thing is tongue-tied, is to really think about, right, data and how you can use data to help that employee experience, right? That's definitely one of the ways that I think that the mental health, if I'm here on any platform that I will share, is really the importance of normalizing the mental health conversations as part of that employee experience as well, because we're seeing more and more of that impact across workers as we ask more from our employees to do what they need to do to operate. So I think, look, the employee experience is something to look at. If we're looking specifically at technology, I think, to go and explore the Microsoft Viva platform and start to kind of think about, how we can change that employee experience and bring things into the flow of the work that they're doing every day. So that would be sort of, I know that wasn't one takeaway, that was kind of a general statement, but there you go.
No, all good. You're allowed to. And Jared, any final takeaways for the audience?
For me, it's not about looking at people in isolation to get the maximum value from them. You need to balance people, technology, and the supporting environments around them to get the most from those people. And then we need to consider that from the coalface. What does it mean at the coalface, right through to senior leadership? And for me, that's how the organisation of the future needs to work.
Awesome, thank you. And then lastly, Richard, your final thoughts for the audience.
I think I come back to my first point about, we need to get out of this habit of trying to do change top down. If we really want to move the needle faster and we want it to be people focused and personalized, we need to start enabling our teams and our leaders. They're at the coalface, they're seeing the challenges firsthand, and they probably have some of the best solutions for these challenges, in their heads right now. So I'd say think about how you can use technology to enable change at the coalface, at the front line, and it will really accelerate the change in the adaptation that our organizations need. So some good examples and customer stories on the website, of course, but that would be my one big takeaway, is think about how you can really genuinely empower your business to adapt.
Excellent, awesome. Well, thanks again to our panelists, Carly Scott Murphy from Microsoft, Jared McGrath from Smart WFM, and Richard Wortley from TeamGauge for today. Thank you for your time. And for our audience, a recording of this event plus links to the content that the team shared today will be emailed to you in the coming days. So I hope it was of value for you today. And thanks again, everyone, for your time today. And I hope please reach out and connect with us. Really like to continue the discussion with you. And if you'd like to see some of the those solutions that Carly and Richard spoke about, and obviously Jared, from looking at that horizontal, how to really rethink your organisation from a digital. So I think going right back to that original question is, the digital workforce here to stay? I'd say it definitely is. Yep, and there's lots of nodding happening there. So once again, thank you everyone for your time today. Please stay safe and be well, and look out for everyone else as well on the way through. Thanks very much. Have a good day.
Thanks, Gavin.
Thank you, everyone.
Cheers.